Good morning. My name is Bruce Bolger, and I'm founder of the Enterprise Engagement Alliance, and we're dedicated to promoting a strategic and systematic approach to achieving organizational purpose, goals, and objectives through people. And the YouTube webinars are really intended to introduce our viewers, and thankfully there are many of you now, and we appreciate that, on the implementation practices, not just talk about how good it is and the economics. I think we've proven that, but to really address how it gets done. And today we're have two experts, if you will, at the front lines of what we're calling purpose leadership, and we're going to discuss that today. And the first guest is, or one of our guests is Davin Salvagno. He's co-founder of PurposePoint and Purpose Summit. We've recently written about him because he came up out of the Costco culture, learned firsthand about how that culture can really change lives and change organizations. And he runs a terrific summit that's coming right up in Charlotte, April 29th to May 1st. And Garry Ridge, he's chairman emeritus, former CEO of WD-40. So we're not going to be talking about WD-40 per se today, but what he learned from his experiences there. And I personally, as an observer, witnessed it, and I really look forward to talking with him about it. And then quickly, just to let you know that we are dedicated at the EA of giving away a lot of information. We believe in the concept of stakeholder capitalism, paying it forward. So we have media resources, and we're now proud to support the Purpose Summit, as I said, coming up in Charlotte. Lots of services and ways to help you and tools. And we always like to thank our customers. They're not sponsors per se, they're our customers. And then also, I'd like to welcome the Purpose Summit sponsors. And what I really like about the Purpose Summit is a lot of their sponsors are actually attendees who are bringing their management to learn about aligning their practices and principles around their purpose, which is what we're going to talk about today. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen and welcome again Davin and Garry to the show today. So anyway, getting right to the questions, and I'm going to start with you, Davin. You know, as you know, we're using this term purpose leadership as really a new paradigm. You know, there was an old type of CEO, and I don't ever like to besmirch anybody who, like Jack Welch. He was, I'm sure he was a great family man, loved a lot of people and did a lot of good, but he created a paradigm for leadership that may or may not be appropriate for today. So, Davin, how do we make sure, though, that people don't look at purpose leadership as virtue signaling? How do we focus it on value creation? And maybe you could even define purpose leadership a little bit. And Garry, I'm going to save that for you because I think you lived it. So, Davin, your view first on that.
Well, Bruce, it's great to be here. Thank you for hosting this. Thank you for your support and partnership in this mission and movement of purpose leadership that we're stewarding. I think we do need to define purpose leadership. And one of the taglines of the summit for years has been lead self, lead others, lead impact. And the thing that those three things have in common is they all lead purpose. So first and foremost, we all each have a set of individual purposes, if you will, gifts, talents, abilities, skill sets that we have the opportunity to use every day in the work that we do and making a difference in this world and the lives of those around us. But often we are so focused on what we get done that we don't do a great job of leading purpose ourselves and then leading others. In any organization, you have a leader that there has to be a shared sense of purpose that they are leading. I know Garry will talk about some of, the memories that they stewarded and made in his leadership paradigm, but every organization has a specific purpose that they're leading, and leaders have a responsibility to call people to that and say, here's where we're going. This is what we're doing. This is why we exist. This is what you're contributing to. And often, again, leaders get so focused on what we need to get done on all of the processes, tasks, results, and all those things that we lose sight of the purpose organizationally that we're leading. And then ultimately, there's a greater impact that we want to have. One of my favorite authors on the topics of leadership is Patrick Lencioni, and he will say that the purpose of every organization is to improve the quality of human life in some way, and that's the impact. So what is the impact that we're making. So for me, when you look at purpose leadership, first it's leading purpose for yourself. How am I using everything that I have in my head and in my heart, the insights, experiences, all the different things that I have to make a difference on a daily basis? Then how am I leading others? So whether it's a team or an organization, what is the purpose that we exist to? And are we contributing to that on a daily basis? And then how are we leading impact? What is the grander purpose that we're trying to serve? And collaboratively, by aligning individual and organizational purpose, are we leading that? And so purpose leadership for me is leading these three different areas: ourselves, others, and the impact that we want to make in the world.
Well, thank you. And Gary, as you know, there's been a lot of big, backlash over the last 3 years or so against efforts to humanize business and, the considered virtue signaling. And it's ironic that the word purpose ironically gets confused with, oh, well, that means that as a CEO, Gary, you have to devote 10% of your profits to helping some outside cause. Can you help really define? And I think Davin did a really good job of separating purpose signaling from purpose when you run a company.
Well, I disagree with the fact that purpose is a new word. Purpose has been around for a long time, and purpose is making a contribution to something bigger than yourself. So we used to say, imagine a place where you go to work every day, you make a contribution to something bigger than yourself. You learn something new, you're protected and you're set free by a compelling set of values, and you go home happy. Happy people create happy families create happy communities create a happy world. And, a long time ago, there was a guy by the name of Aristotle, born in 384 BC. He said, pleasure in the job puts perfection in the work. And our job as leaders is to create an atmosphere in the organizations we get the privilege to lead, where people feel safe, their psychological safety, and really working on that difference between leadership as a balance between being tough-minded and tender-hearted, and the genius is in the middle. So, if you think about the elements of a purpose-driven organization, it's people first. We're coaches, we're not managers. We have a clearly defined, authentic purpose. We have a hierarchical set of values. We have transparency and a simple vision. We have learning moments that reduce fear. We have belonging, acceptance, connectedness, security, support, inclusion, identity. And we have 4 pillars: care, candor, accountability, and responsibility that we sit on. And all of those come together that we are then serving the communities that we have the privilege of operating in, the customers that we have the privilege of serving, the people who we have the privilege of working with every day. So it's not an either or. It's a both and, both and, both and.
So it's not, many people argue that this is a trade-off, that when you care about people, it's a trade-off. Davin, what's your view on that?
So I could not disagree more with that. And I think that's what people are missing. People are really trying to, we already heard it said, work smarter, not harder. And what's interesting is there's a lot of people who are working really, really hard because they believe that this is a trade-off, but they'd be working smarter if they believe that it wasn't. One of my favorite, Gary will talk about removing fear. For anyone who's a parent, I've got 2 kids. I've got a 13-year-old and a 9-year-old. But when they were younger, we used to watch this movie called Monsters, Inc. And for anyone who knows or has seen Monsters, Inc., the whole premise of that movie is that, monsters, go into the human world and they scare children and they turn that fear into energy to power their monster world. And then what you find out at the end of the movie, spoiler alert, Billy Crystal, who plays one of the main characters, accidentally makes a kid laugh. And the kid's laughter is 10 times more powerful than the fear. And they realized they had it wrong all along, that if they would have focused on laughter instead of fear, they would have had 10 times the results and it would have been more efficient, more productive. In many ways, it's the same conversation. There's a lot of people that take this idea of purpose, this idea of caring for people, this idea of vulnerability, this idea of being transparent, this idea of being a servant leader, all these things that there's countless books written about. And this, again, as Gary said, isn't a new idea. They take this thing and to them, they just feel like it's not something that's supposed to be a part of the business world. But realistically, if we embrace these ideas, it's more powerful than the traditional tactics of fear and, threatening and oppressive, poor cultures, all the different things that have plagued, the workplace for years. So this dichotomy has lasted for a very, very long time. And so I would challenge that for those who look at anything around the purpose, caring for people, values, all the stuff that we talk about as virtue signaling or as fluff or as the soft, feely stuff, they're missing out big time on the most powerful resource that's available to power their business, their people, and to create results that are far greater than they would get if they use traditional methods.
Well, I would argue that if you're right, it's not just people that are missing out on it, it's on investors, it's shareholders. I happen to notice, I know you don't work there anymore, and I'm not talking about your former place, but boy, that I wish I had bought that stock when you joined, Garry. I got to tell you that. So Garry, how did you come upon this? I know you come from Australia, which is paradise in my view, but how did you come upon these principles? Because if you think about it, you're marrying two things, because I've read a lot about you. You're not just again, I know you're a humble man, but reading about you, it's not that you just understand the value of people. And that you had those leadership qualities that you would argue maybe have been taught since the times of Aristotle. And yet here we are, and we'll discuss it later. I'm not sure those are universally accepted practices that you talk about. But I'd like to know, so you've got the human element, but then you adopted a system. You just started it. You said it so fast, I wouldn't have been able to write it down. But you had a system. So how did you come upon the marrying of the heart and the system? Where'd that come from?
Well, it's simple. I'm consciously incompetent, so I need all the I need all the help I can get. And when I was given the privilege of leading WD-40 company in 1997, I was looking for the way of saying, if we're to expand the company globally, how do we give people freedom? And in fact, I discovered a program at the University of San Diego, Master of Science in Executive Leadership. And I there met my mentor and my great friend, Dr. Ken Blanchard. And I learned servant leadership from Ken and others like Marshall Goldsmith and in later days, Simon Sinek. And I listened to all their theory and I thought, well, why don't I put it in practice and see if it works? So I'm a a relentless stealer of good ideas because in most circumstances, I'm probably wrong and roughly right. So I need all the help I can get. And that's really where it started from. And what worked, we turned up the volume on. But here's the simple equation, Bruce, right? I can write a pretty good marketing plan. I can write a good strategic plan. Let's take that strategic plan or that marketing plan and take it to some smart professor and say, tell me how good this is. And they said, very good strategic plan there, Garry, 60 out of 100. Thank you. But if only 20% of my people go to work every day and are dedicated to and enthusiastically executing against that plan, 20 times 60 is 1,200. But if 80% of my people go to work every day and are doing that, 80 times 60 is 4,800. So it's the will of the people times the strategy that equals the economic outcome. And that's why our shareholders at WD-40 did so well over time, because we had 93% employee engagement and 98% of our people said they love to work at the company because we had a high will of the people and a reasonable strategy.
Well, we're going to have time in this show, thanks to your generosity, to get into why the investment community isn't able to see that, how all of that is buried in goodwill on the balance sheets, and one of the reasons that perhaps your methodology has not spread further, but we'll talk about that. Davin, your view, where did you come from this? I saw you started it. I love the story you told about Costco. How did you get to the path of purpose leadership?
So, as you were actually even sharing that question with Garry earlier, and I was thinking, where did this actually start from, right? And it did start at Costco. So I had the opportunity to begin working at Costco in 2001. And I met Jim Sinegal. Jim Sinegal was the founder and CEO of Costco. And I'll never forget the first time I met him. He walked into the store and, he had khaki pants on, button-down shirt, kind of like Jake from State Farm, and had a name badge, and it just said Jim. That's all it said. And he walked up to me, and I'm this young guy in my early 20s, just getting started in marketing with the company. And he walks up to me and he puts his hand out and he says, "Hi, I'm Jim. What's your name?" Now, he knows my name because I'm wearing a name badge that says Davin, and I know his name's Jim because he's wearing a name badge that says Jim. But he wanted to make a human connection, right? So he looks me in the eye, puts his hand out and says, "I'm Jim. What's your name?" And I said, "I'm Davin. Nice to meet you, Jim." And he says, "Davin, tell me, why do you work at Costco? What is it that we're doing well? And what could we be doing better?" And he was a walking, talking engagement survey before engagement surveys were a thing. But then he asked me this. He said, "Tell me, Davin, what are your goals and dreams? And by working at Costco, will we help you fulfill them?" And that question blew my mind because I'm sitting here going, here's the founder and CEO of this highly successful retail company. And first he asked me basically how the company's doing, which is expected. But then he actually took time to ask about what my personal goals and dreams were, and if by working for his company, it was going to be a solution to them. Why should he care? Now, that made me, in that moment, one of the highest, biggest raving fans of Costco. I couldn't stop talking about Costco after that moment. Why? Because he took a genuine interest in my purpose and if I was going to achieve my purpose at the company. And so that was the first time that seed was kind of planted in my head. And from that point forward, it was never lost on me that this is how leadership should operate. Leaders should stop, pause, acknowledge kind of what they are leading. Hey, how's our company doing, all those things, but then stop and pause and take a genuine interest in the people that they're leading and what matters to them. And to ask if by being a part of what it is that they're a part of, if they're going to achieve those things. And I think that's what many, many, many people are missing. And we could talk about statistics and ROI all day long. I mean, WD-40 is a great example. There's several other companies that we could cite here if we want to get into investment proofs of the concept. But there's no shortage of data that proves that this type of leadership leads to positive outcomes. Everyone wants the great results of Costco, a highly respected company, but how did they get there? Because of purpose leadership of Jim Sinegal. Everyone wants the results of a WD-40, but how did they get there? Well, because of the culture and purpose results of a purpose leader like a Garry Ridge, and right, obviously there's new leadership there today, right? And we could go on and company. Everyone wants the results, but when you drill down to ask how they got there, it starts with genuine purpose leadership.
And so, thank you. And I'm going to, Garry, on that note, let's get into the principles. And you said it so fast at the beginning, we could almost say, well, you already covered it, but I want to unpack it a little bit because here's what I see. First off, I might even be older than both of you. I don't know, but I've been around a lot. I've seen a lot. And I've been, as Chester, our mutual colleague, Chester Elton, someone I greatly admire, has been really working for decades. I used to hear him on the radio, waking up in the morning on CBS radio. To change this. And yet, we'll have later in the discussion, I only think there are about 10% of CEOs are like Garry Ridge, if I had to say. And I'm not going to ask you, Garry, to estimate that. But so I want to ask you, Garry, but later on we'll discuss why this concept of purpose leadership hasn't become more entrenched. But please tell us your point of view. And I'm going to lead with this. One of the things I've noticed is the two elements to this. And you guys have really identified the ability to lead with purpose, but also to create a sense of purpose within your employees. That is really important. And then finally, to have a system in a big company with 500 employees, you have to have a system. So Garry, what is the basic framework for purpose leadership?
Well, firstly, let me say this. A dear friend of Davin and myself is Charlie Maloof. He runs Big River Retail, Ashley furniture stores in some of the states of US. And he makes a wonderful comment. He says, culture is not a microwavable event. It's a crock pot event. And I think that's the problem that most leaders come at. And Wall Street are a big offender here. You don't build enduring companies in 90-day intervals. It's not what did you do for me in the last 90 days. You build an enduring company over time. And I was fortunate enough to be a CEO for 25 years of the same company. So culture equals values plus behavior times consistency. Do you have a set of values in the organization that protect people and set them free? As a leader, are you firstly loving your people enough to reward them and applaud them for doing great work? And are you brave enough to redirect them, not protecting your own comfort zone at the expense of other people's development? And do you do it every day, every minute, every day, every minute? And that's really the whole basis of building a culture in an organization. Bruce, when I was a young boy back in Australia, my science teacher gave me a petri dish. And they said, we're going to grow culture in the petri dish. Two things that are important. Number one is the ingredients. What are the ingredients you're going to put in the petri dish? And number two, as the owner of the petri dish, how are you going to take care of that petri dish on a daily basis? So if this was soft, a lot of people were doing it. This is damn hard, really hard. And particularly when you've got short-term thinking where people are saying, well, you missed your quarter by a penny. It wasn't my quarter. You made up the number.
So let me, we recently did a show with somebody, I don't know if you've ever met him. I think you'd enjoy him, Joe Hinrichs. He's the CEO of CSX. And he made a really interesting point, agreeing with you, by the way. He said, measuring me on quarterly results, it's return on assets. And am I getting a return on assets that's better than in the capital markets? So if that pension fund is investing in my company, are they going to do better with me than they could do ordinarily? That's the measure, not whether I hit some number every 3 months. So is return on assets a better measure? What would you suggest for by the way, every time Costco used to raise its pay, its stock used to go down. I don't think that happens anymore. What is a better metrics, Garry?
Well, again, profit is not a sin. One of the values at WD-40 was sustaining the WD-40 economy, which means you have to build an organization that creates the economic flow that allows you to support the people you have the privilege to lead and the investors who are trusting you with their investment. We had a return on invested capital of over 32%. Which means that we were very efficient in making sure that the capital that we were privileged to have was well treated. So, there's many measures out there, but it's not just one thing. I mean, it's a combination of all that gets you to the end result that you want to get. So, is it stock price? Well, people used to say to me, what do you think about the stock price? Well, I have no control over it. I mean, all I can do is help build an organization that, lives its values and produces, a regular, dependable result. Dividends. We pay dividends from day one. So really, really, important to our shareholder base. But then it also, what's your capital structure? There are so many things that go into a business that are on the business side. But at the end of the day, if your people go to work every day and they're sitting and quitting, you're not getting the full result you want. And that's what happens. Leaders spend a disproportionate amount of their time on the strategy and execution because, to be honest, strategy is easy. The people stuff is really hard because we're dealing with the most complex thing in the world, ourselves and people.
And Davin, this gets back to, as you know, we're going to be updating our Enterprise Engagement Academy specifically because we left out, and we did it for a reason, we left out the people leadership element because it was well covered. Marshall Goldsmith, gosh, who needs to go? I mean, come on. So when we launched the EEA, we were all about the research showing the implementation process. The show is not about the application of total quality management to people, but that essentially is our approach. And by the way, when I studied Garry's work, he might not have ever used that terminology, but there was a system. There was a system in that organization based on purpose and values that freed people up, as I understand it, to make independent decisions because they knew the values and they knew they could make a mistake and that, et cetera. But so, Davin, what is missing? We have all these great coaches. I mean, everything that Goldsmith has ever written, or Simon Sinek has ever written, it resonates in my heart. And yet, how many CEOs have done what Garry did and say, maybe I'll apply that? So, Davin, why do you think? Well, I'll step back. We haven't assumed that everybody is missing this. So let me what is key to making that happen? You saw what Garry did there. How do you get employee engagement up to 95%? It isn't just by giving people rewards, I can't imagine. What are the essence for that?
So I think the number one thing that's missing, if we were to look back at this entire conversation we've had from the beginning, right? Defining what purpose leadership is, talking about, why it makes sense, proving that it does make sense, talking about why more investors don't embrace the concept, why it's, not more common. You generously shared that probably 10% of CEOs are like Garry Ridge. I think that's a very generous number. I think it's actually a lot less than 10%. I think what's missing is there's not a lot of people willing to play the long game. And if you look at the long game, if you look at any company, Garry talked about consistency. You talk about any company, whether it's a Costco, whether it's a WD-40, whether it's Broad River Retail, Ashley Home Stores, our friend Charlie Malouf. There's so many companies that we could talk about. But if you look at their stock price over time, it goes up, it goes down, it goes up, it goes down, like any stock price. But if you look at it over a period of time, by and large, it's gone up. And so it's only the companies that were doing this and then their stock crashed and then are no longer around anymore, or they filed bankruptcy. Well, no one asked the questions, what happened there? And I would argue that what happened there was they sacrificed their values. They sacrificed their people. They gave up on the long game because of short-term pressures. And so what's the number one thing that's missing? You can embody all of these great works. You can read Marshall's work, my work, Garry's work, Simon's work. You could put all these equations on whiteboards. You craft best mission statements in the world. But here's the thing. There's going to be a point in time where it's going to get hard. There are going to be short-term pressures that you are going to be tested as a leader. Are you going to sacrifice all of the stuff that you've read and put up on walls and that you say that you embody, that you say are the values of the organization, to meet short-term goals and objectives or to accomplish short-term gains? And the moment that you do that and you give up on the long game, that's where most companies all of a sudden start to go down this downward spiral effect that they can't get out of. It's the companies that refuse to compromise on their values, that refuse to compromise on this mindset, that continue to play the long game, that over time create these great, sustainable, profitable cultures that people want to be a part of, that they don't want to leave, that have generic high engagement scores that are not falsified and that don't need to be propped up because they developed it over time. And every time they had to make a critical decision on whether or not they were going to stick with their values and say that these things matter and their people were watching, they saw that they did. And that's why they're still around.
And, it's very interesting, Garry, before the show, I went back over the history of WD-40. And again, the show is not about WD-40. You've retired. You can celebrate. But
Refired. My new book.
There you go. You should have told me about it. Everybody, any dumbass can do it. Let's talk about that. I mean it. But back to this, I noticed it wasn't when you took over. One of the things interesting, you knew WD-40 when you took over as CEO because you had worked there. It looks like you had worked your way up, right? But it wasn't immediate, your results. And when you look at your history, the first few years were, the stock didn't do great. Your finances, you had some really tough years. And then all of a sudden, I think it was like 5 years, roughly, boom, and just everything. And by the way, Davin, after that 5 or 7 years, there weren't that many little blips. I'm telling you, any shareholder, it wasn't quite a NVIDIA. No, it wasn't a NVIDIA, but it might have been a 10-bagger. So, Garry, what was it? Why did it obviously takes some time? Can you get a little bit more granular if you're talking to a CEO who's taking over and I'm not saying you were taking over a listless company, But what do you say to a CEO? Okay, you're taking over a company. What's it going to take to get through that tough period?
Well, again, you can't sprinkle fairy dust over a company and change culture. And the culture at WD-40 wasn't bad. It just wasn't the culture that was going to take us to the future. And that's what was clearly obvious to me in that, our biggest growth opportunity was to take the blue and yellow can with a little red top to the world. We were basically a US brand. So we had to build momentum over time. And, those early years, I got some serious feedback from, why aren't you doing this? Why don't you do that? And I said, hang on. If we understand what our true purpose is and where we want to go, then we've got to stick with this. And, I sat across from some potential investors and said, please don't buy our stock because you'll never be satisfied if you're looking for a quick buck. But if you want, we're going to build an enduring company that we're going to be proud to hand on to others into the future. And in my 25 years at WD-40 Company as CEO, we never laid a person off ever through any economic downturn, upturn, whatever. We said our people are our number one asset, and we have to continue to respect our people. Now, I did get a lot of feedback from our people from time to time that we were lean and mean. Well, we weren't mean, but we were lean. But we never, we had no right to mess with people's lives by making bad leadership decisions. So it takes time. It takes time to embed the values in the organization, to reduce fear. We took the word failure out and replaced it with learning moments. And all of that took time. And you're right, the stock kind of went like this, and then it went like this. And the only reason it went like that is because we started to perform above and beyond what we were in the past. And again, it was because we had such a high percentage of our people going to work every day, living our purpose, which was, and do you know what our purpose was, Bruce? Our purpose was to create positive, lasting memories. If you read our purpose statement, it says, we exist to create positive, lasting memories, solving problems in factories, homes, and workshops around the world. We solve problems and we create opportunities. So if you asked me what business we're in, I say we're in the memories business.
That's extraordinary. Because, by the way, everyone, and you don't work there anymore, but again, everyone has that blue can, and it's like it does everything. It's like but Davin, getting back to this, the whole issue of, implementation, because that's really the challenge. And Garry says it's really hard work. So I want to but then he wrote a book and says, pull that book up again, show us again. Because I want to get into this. Any damn dumbass can do it. Okay. Yeah. Take over a company and have its stock go up about 300 or 400% over 20 years. We'll get into that, Garry. But Davin, because we do have time. Thank you. Getting back to this issue, one of the biggest problems I see in companies that does take time is silos. That every organization, it's like feudalism. I swear, I've studied history. It's oddly like feudalism. As soon as you have departments, they start struggling. They're fighting for resources. They have their own views. They want the CEO to give them more resources. Isn't purpose one of the best ways to break down silos? Isn't that one of the, and not a purpose on your wall? And Garry, you're going to speak to that as well. Not just the 4 C's on your wall, but you have to embed it into everything. But that's one of the things I love about purpose leadership. It really, in other words, it's not the shareholder that counts, number one. It is the reason of the organization, because if it doesn't fulfill that reason, then there'll be no money for the shareholders or the stakeholders. So what is the role of purpose in getting alignment?
Well, 100%. It absolutely is, I would say, the number one antidote to a lot of the dysfunction that you see, whether it's departmentally or demographically across organizations. I love how Garry talks about ego and how ego eats empathy, when empathy should eat our ego. The reality is that by and large, we're innately self-focused human beings. I mean, that's one of the massive problems, and not just in business, just in society, period. Everyone's looking, for their own best interests. They're looking how they can get the upper hand. They're always looking for more. I mean, this is ingrained for us at a young age. I mentioned I've got two kids, right? 13, 9. If we have dessert, they're arguing over who's getting the bigger piece of the pie. They're not even in the business world yet. But that's innately within us on how do we get not just our fair share, how do we get the upper share? And that is problematic across all businesses, all sectors, all industries, no matter how great your purpose is. In fact, it's most rampant in the nonprofit sector and in the faith-based sectors. The competition of how do we get the upper hand, who gets there first, is rampant in those worlds where purpose should be most evident. So the number one thing that you have to do is constantly come back to this focus of what is the purpose? Garry talked about it, contributing to something greater than ourselves. What is the purpose that we are here to achieve organizationally? What is my part in that individually? And now that could mean if I'm leading a department, it could mean if I'm leading a demographic. You know, one of my favorite stories, and this isn't, I certainly didn't come up with this, it's actually a piece of history, is when we were trying to put, you know, a man on the moon. And, you know, President Kennedy went and he toured NASA and he went to all the different departments and then looking at what all they were doing to get a person to the moon. And then he comes across the janitor and the janitor's, you know, mopping back and forth. And, you know, President Kennedy asked the janitor, what do you do here? And his answer was, I'm helping to get a man on the moon. And so there was clarity of what his purpose was, regardless of what his job, department, title, or status was. And a lot of times we think that our department is the most important. I've got this title, you know, rah, 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 like all of these different things. This ego sets us up and we think that our ego all of a sudden is more important than the purpose that we're a part of. So the more that we can, as leaders, as purpose leaders, focus on the purpose that we are here for and point people to that, the more we break down those silos, the more we diffuse dysfunction and variability within departments, demographics, geographics. That's the number one thing that's missing. And so that's why I keep on saying purpose isn't fluff. It's foundational. It needs to be the thing that you're building everything else on top of and that you're constantly pointing to.
And Garry, that leads me to something I wanted to bring up that you alluded to, your never having laid off an employee. I actually followed you during the Great Recession. And during the and this is where purpose, folks, comes into play. Garry said earlier, we heard him say it, people are his number one asset. So the Great Recession comes. All of a sudden, the demand for WD-40's industrial products evaporates. Literally, I think your sales went down 40%. I mean, some staggering amount. And then I read at the time, no layoffs. And then I read that and sure, Garry, I'm going to ask you to speak to this. Then I read that and maybe I'm wrong, that when the Great Recession returned, you guys skyrocketed because when all of your competitors had to go back out, hire people, you know, reorganize, ramp up, you guys were all lubricated and ready to go. Is that all true?
I don't think our revenue went down 40%, but I don't remember. But I don't recall that. But I know that we went through some challenging time. Maybe in the industrial sector, it went down by that. But, you know, in the Great Recession, my statement was, it's better for all of us to hurt a little than a few people to hurt a lot. And that didn't mean we didn't do things in the company. Of course we did. We had a salary freeze. We fortunately never took away any benefits. We didn't touch anyone's 401k account. But, you know, we worked out that you could get away with one copy of the Wall Street Journal instead of 10 going to 10 different desks. In fact, it was a pretty healthy time when I think about it, because we implemented what I call the Stupid Policies Program. It was a great opportunity for us to ask our people in the organization, what are all the stupid policies and procedures we have that are eating our overhead here that we can do without right now? So it was a very cleansing time. But we never laid anyone off. And you're exactly right. We came out of that and we were thriving because we didn't have to go and restock the talent pool. We didn't have to go and restock the brain trust. And the people, when they came out of that, they said, if I had to be anywhere right now, I'm going to be here because I trust our people.
So sorry about that. So, one of the things, and we're going to get to, so we do have time to get into some more details, but Davin, we are getting toward the end. Everything that Garry has done, and there are other examples too, of privately held companies, publicly held companies that have steadfastly followed this. I was being nice saying 10% also. I think it's less. But why? Why is this common? It's stupid. It's easy, right? But it isn't. We're going to talk about that, Garry, because but the framework, I could tell you in 3 minutes how to do it. If I'm riding with the CEO, he says, Bruce, how do you implement? I could tell him in 3 minutes. That's not the issue. It's doing it. So, Davin, why hasn't this caught on more?
Well, I said it earlier, right? Human behavior, right? Number one, there's just that we do have to. Garry talked about it. We are the most complex thing on the planet, and so this takes knowing yourself and knowing how to lead yourself and to always do the right thing, even when it's not the most popular thing. And there's not a lot of people that are willing to do that. I mean, listen, there's no shortage of movies or political stories of people who are all well-intentioned, right? And they're going to be the difference maker. And then they get into it, right? They get into the CEO role, or they get into politics, or they get in and they compromise. They compromise because of outside pressure and because of our innate human behavior. That's never going away. There is not going to be, as great as a writer and speaker that Garry is and that I may be, there is no book or no talk that we are going to give that is going to change the fundamental wiring of who we are as human beings and how we cave to the circumstances around us. That has been around for a very, very long time. So the only thing that we can do is continue to make people aware of it and to believe that they can choose to do the right thing, even if it isn't the most popular thing or the most beneficial thing to them. And the only way to continue to do that, other than just saying, hey, this is feel-good stuff, is to show the evidence, to tell the stories, to show the data like we've talked about on here. One of the things that we also don't talk about is the intangibles. I mentioned Patrick Lencioni earlier before, and, he talks about the 5 dysfunctions of the team, which was his number one selling book of many books that he's written. But the foundational piece of that book is trust, is building trust. And so a lot of times what happens is you could build a great company, you could build all these great values, you could be well-intentioned, you can do all these things. And then the second that you compromise on those things, people lose trust. And it's really, really hard to get trust back. Really hard. Really easy to gain it when you haven't violated it. Really hard to get it back once you have. The reason that WD-40 bounced back so quickly is because of the decisions that they made, people were able to trust who the company they work for, the values that were stated, and they knew that those weren't going to be compromised. So the question that you have to ask yourself is, if I'm not going to do the right thing because it's not popular, if I'm going to cave in to outside pressure, even though there might be short-term gain or whatever the case is, whatever the trade-offs are, what's the trust impact? Because no one's measuring that. And that's the problem. And so if you measure the trust impact based off of your decisions and recognize how hard it is to bounce back from that, you will be less apt to compromise on the things that are most important that we've spent our time talking about today.
So, applying this, I'm going to ask you, Garry, again, I once asked Marshall Goldsmith about 6 or 7 years ago in an email exchange, because I really admire everything he presents. And it sounded maybe a little snarky, and he might have misunderstood me because I really meant well. My question to him was, Marshall, this is such great wisdom. Why? And you guys, you're talking to the number one CEOs. You guys are I didn't say it this way, but you're in the in crowd. Everybody is talking to you. Why isn't this happening? And he wrote me back something very interesting. I never forgot. He said, all we can do is share our wisdom.
Right.
He said, that's all we can do as a coach. Garry, why? Look at your stock. I mean, to market this event, we put your stock chart up on, because again, I think there are multiple, there's a lot of different companies just don't make money. I'm so proud that I've run companies. I put kids through college. That makes my day every day to think that I put somebody's child, our company paid for that through their good work. And that to me makes me happy every day. Why aren't more CEOs doing what you did?
Ego, short-term thinking, pressure, that, no good deed goes unpunished, Bruce, that's for sure. But also, I think that it's awareness. Marshall's a very dear friend of mine. I actually was just speaking with him yesterday. We're working together on a number of projects together. But, he says it's all about awareness. And, I have this little book, right? And you wouldn't think that a guy that my age would have to have a book with a list of questions about, and it says, am I being the person I want to be right now? And then it says, who is that person? And I read this list every day because we are just basic human beings bumbling our way down the pathway of life. And in the bushes of this pathway are thieves. And these thieves run out and they grab us. And they're thieves of short-term thinking, of all of the stuff that goes on, of ego and whatever. And we go in the bush and we think, oh, it feels good here. But it's not where we want it to be. And my list says, I want to be grateful. I want to be caring. I want to be empathetic. I want to be reasonable. I want to be a listener. I want to be fact-based. I want to have a balanced opinion. I want to be curious. I want to be a learner. And I want to throw sunshine, not a shadow. And I have to read this often. And I had this as a leader at WD-40 because the world can take me off where I want to be unless I keep reminding myself. So it's consistency around what you really stand for that's important, and being brave enough. And you talked about, values in organizations a little earlier, Bruce. In most organizations, the video doesn't match the script. The video does not match the script. Yeah, we got some values. Put them up on the wall there. Aren't they lovely? Yeah, but how do you act? What does it look like around here? And that's the other side of it. So culture equals values plus behavior times consistency. And you've got to do it in good times, and you've got to do it in times that are not so good. And it's not going to be easy, and you're going to get a lot of pressure. But what you said, Bruce, is so important. At the end of the day, all that matters is how did our people leave when they went home that night? Sure. If we can let people go home happy people create happy communities create a happy world. And we need a happy world, and business has the biggest opportunity ever to have a happy world. And that's why I can't wait for those people to come to the Purpose Summit in Charlotte, because we talk about how do you build a culture where you send people home happy and where you can support their families, and we can make a real difference in the world. And that's why I refired. I didn't retire.
Well, same here. I'm going to work until I drop. So just quickly getting toward the end here. The importance of the fundamental values of business. To me, this is free enterprise, and if as long as if you act legally, you have a right to be a shareholder capital. You have a right to be a schmuck as long as you're legal, in my view. Now, very interestingly, I'm going to ask you a question. The Europeans have passed a law last year called the anti-greenwashing law. And it's actually against companies making false, unsubstantiated claims about how they treat customers, employees, distribution and supply chain partners, and communities. It's really stakeholder management. And what they ask companies to disclose, you can, as long as you're a legal company, do whatever you want. They don't say you can't do these things. They just say, disclose it. Disclose it. And by the way, Garry and Davin, it's going to have to be audited. And in many of the countries, the penalties will be criminal, literally. France has just designated you'll go to jail if you violate this. Now, again, I don't like the big horn of government coming down on people, but this is a reality. We saw the GDPR as the global data regulations have had massive impact on privacy. Ask Apple whether European laws have had any impact. What do you think, gentlemen, both of you, of a law that within 2 years is going to require, you would probably, Garry, you guys would have had to comply, and I think it would have been fun. I think it would have been a competitive advantage for you. What do you think about transparency? And what do you think about transparency that is enforced by government regulation? Is that going too far, Garry and Davin?
Well, our number one value at WD-40 was we value doing the right thing. And I'm glad that they're going after greenwashers. I'd be curious to see if a similar type of law was applied to politicians, actually.
That's why the politicians are always safe, because they write the laws. But in any case, I happen to agree with you on that 100%. I thought, in fact, that when I saw the law, I thought the same thing. Why don't we also use that same GDPR on government? That might help. But in terms of transparency, how important is transparency today to gain trust, Davin? And or else, Garry, answer that. We're almost done.
It's the fundamental. I mean, tell the truth. And you're right. I've saw so many, instances of what you would call greenwashing in the marketplace, where people are bending the truth. It's not true. I mean, now for whatever their motivation is, but our number one value at WD-40 Company is we value doing the right thing. Our number two value at WD-40 Company is we value creating positive, lasting memories in all of our relationships. That's why we had a mandate that was we will never have any cancer-causing chemicals in anything we make, because number one, it's not doing the right thing, and number two, cancer doesn't create positive, lasting memories. And we made $1 million decisions based on those two values, where we could have put other ingredients in our can and, just put a label on the back that says, Prop 65 warning. Your competitors do it. Why don't you do it? You can save millions of dollars. Your shareholders will love you. It's against our values. Number one, it's not doing the right thing. Number two, it doesn't create positive, lasting memories. Thanks very much.
So, Davin, on that note, I've been noticing a lot of coverage lately about shrinkflation, and also of companies replacing ingredients. And frankly, I think they have every right to do that. But why don't they just tell us? Why don't they just put it on the package? I mean, I'm an owner. We are stockholders of companies that have done that. And you know what? I don't myself really like making money deceiving people. Do you think there's a price that companies pay for doing this when they could simply disclose it and put it on the box? Am I missing something? Or can we get away with this type of thing today?
No, you're absolutely right. And one of the things that I would like to share with people is envision drawing two circles, like a bullseye, if you will. You've got a center circle and then you've got an outside circle. And imagine that purpose and doing the right thing are synonymous and they're in that center circle. And then imagine the outer circle is how far you can get before you're considered doing the wrong thing, right? You're no longer in the gray area. You're not doing the right thing anymore, and you're outside of your purpose. The problem is that there are far too many companies that are saying, how close can we get to the outside of the edge of this circle and still say that we're purpose-driven, that we're doing the right thing, we're a great brand, we're a great company? Like, where do we cross that line? And there are far too few companies like a WD-40 that are saying, how close can we get to that inner circle? How close can we get to the very dead center of our purpose and doing the right thing and being the example for others to follow? And Bruce, your arrow can only be pointing one way. It's not curved. So the question and the challenge that I have for leaders who've made it through our time together on this call is, which way is your arrow pointing? Is it pointing to the dead center of saying, I embrace purpose leadership. I embrace doing the right thing. I embrace being transparent that this is what we're going to do, even if it means sacrificing short-term gains, even if it means that it's not the popular opinion, all of these things, this is what we are doing? Or is your arrow pointing the other way and saying, no, we're going to say that we're a purpose-driven company. We're going to say that we do the right thing. We're going to greenwash and do all this stuff, but we're going to see how far we can get to the end to make sure that we maximize our profitability and all of the other different things that, other companies are sacrificing to say, how close can we get to that center?
And the people that work in the company where the arrow is pointing to the middle are so proud to say, I work for that company. And therefore, their engagement is high. Therefore, they are every day going to work and going to do what they do to maximize what our real purpose is, hence high will of the people. But how do people feel when they work for a company that just got written up as being the greenwasher? Where do I work?
Or that just laid off 20,000 people or
Yeah.
whatever, right?
Well,
Who's next?
so we're wrapping up, but what's really interesting here, I think that what will drive this at the end of the day, ironically, are going to be the investors and the customers and the employees, and that the revolution is going to happen. Um, Basically, like former President Bush said, it's 1,000 points of light. It's not going to be a roaring revolution, but gentlemen, you folks are contributing to it. And I look forward to working with you for the rest of my career on not just making it more aware, but getting more awareness, but actually showing how it's a competitive edge. Because as a journalist who I've corresponded with pointed out, he said, you really can't fake this type of stuff. You cannot fake it because everything is now going to be, even without that European law, how are we compensating our employees? Are we paying them a living wage so that they're not starving when they go home? Do we have so many we all need to have independent contractors, but how much are we relying on them? Okay. How much are we abusing people's lives by having them? Look at the retail trade. Look at the great Starbucks. It's a sad thing to see what's happening there. How do they use stock buybacks? Shareholders have a right to they've invested their money. But look at Ford Motor. They paid back $5 billion in share buybacks. And then, gentlemen, they had a strike that cost them $12 billion. I mean, really, I don't think we created shareholder value. And then, of course, WD-40 paid dividends every single year. And yet its employees were well taken care of. And then you said something beautiful. You didn't comply you didn't keep cancer causing products out of your products because of the law. You did it because it was part of your purpose. And that, frankly, that's the best reason of all. So, gentlemen, I cannot thank you enough. I think what we've really learned here today, and we'll have all of this up we'll write an article that summarizes it for those who don't want to watch it, but we're going to have it up on our EEA YouTube show. And gosh, we've been getting hundreds of people very rapidly coming to these shows. So thank you. And really what we're going to be doing together as our two organizations, Davin, is really focusing on how to implement this. The proof is in the pudding. Look at Garry Ridge's performance at WD-40. Listen to what he says. If only 10%, if only 2% of U.S. companies are doing this, there's a tremendous amount of value to be created ahead. And I know it's going to happen. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. If you can hang on 1 second for a quick housekeeping note. Folks, thank you for listening and see you in another show.